Okay, so this is the Bible study for Matthew 18:10 through 14. And we're throwing in a little verse, Luke 10 or Luke 19:10 as well. So the text for today says, "See that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Lord, of my Father in heaven." And verse 11 does not exist here in my NIV Bible, but it says some manuscripts include here the words of Luke 19:10. So we've talked about that before, that these texts were copied and copied by scribes, and that the translations that we have used, that verses were marked in, were translations of what we had, and not necessarily translations of the earliest manuscripts. So in the 1970s, I believe it was, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and we found earlier copies of the Bible. And in those earlier copies, we found some things that differed from the copies that we had. So we, some of the newer translations take that into account. Now, anytime there's something different from, and this is particularly true of the NIV, anytime there's something different in the earliest manuscripts that it is using from what we had already had translated and had been using, perhaps in the King James or something like that, it notes it. So in this text, it chooses not to include verse 11 because the earliest manuscripts don't have it. But it does note that the earliest manuscripts have words similar to Luke 19:10. Which says, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save to save the lost." So I think we can probably all agree that adding that verse, first of all, was something that Jesus did say, as Luke records it. So it's not like it was something was added that Jesus didn't say. And it is something that applies or informs this text. So I don't think there's anything, like, it's not like including or not including verse 11, as some manuscripts have, changed the meaning of the text. It doesn't do that. It doesn't change, I think, the heart of Jesus, or as we understand it, or change our understanding of the heart of Jesus. And so including it or not including it, I don't think changes the Bible in any significant way. But I do like that we have the NIV does not include it, but points to what it used to say, what it said in some manuscripts, and points to that in another book of the Bible, in another gospel, where Jesus really did say this thing. So we don't have to include it here to know that Jesus said it, because we can look back to that other verse. So I've read 10 and then 19, Luke 19:10, and now we're going to move into Matthew 18:12. What do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go to look for that one that wandered off? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he is happier about the one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any one of these little ones should perish. So remember that you can download PDF copies of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us. And number 1 says, what did we talk about in the last Bible study in 18:6 through 9? A, causing these little ones to stumble. That's true, sort of. We talked about the fact that he may not have been referring to little ones at all, but still continuing on the metaphor of the child that he brought into the sort of circle or the conversation with his disciples. B, the seriousness of sin to the point that drastic measures could be warranted to keep yourself free from it. He says, man, if your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. And we talked about the fact that probably he's not sort of prescribing or ordering cutting off hands or millstones around people's necks, but rather he's trying to explain that that would be warranted. That kind of drastic measure is not unreasonable. It's reasonable because if you understand how significant it is to cause somebody to fall away, or that a part of you causes you to fall away, then you would understand that this is not as drastic as it sounds. And if you think it's drastic, perhaps that's because you have not taken into account the seriousness of sin. You have not considered sin and falling away from Christ as big a deal as it really is. And so that's an important thing to consider. See the seriousness of leading people astray instead of helping them come closer to God. So yes, all of that's what we talked about. Number 2, what is Jesus talking about now according to Matthew 18:10? A, still little ones. Maybe this is still what he was already talking about. In other words, we have separated this out because there are some strong points that he's making, but at the same time, these are all connected. He's still talking to the same disciples. He's still using the same metaphor. We need to not forget that this discussion was a discussion where they wanted to know from Jesus who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And he brought a child into their circle and says, be like a little child. This is the greatest. And if you don't think, so this little child was somebody that was put outside of the circle, that is not given importance when we're having adult conversations like we are when we're teaching things about God. They're playing and they're out there somewhere. And the person that nobody thinks is important, so much so that they've been left out of the conversation, left out of the circle, that's the person that I think is most important. And those of you that are trying to figure out who is most important, so much so that you'll ignore the people outside the circle, you are not understanding. So don't cause this little one to stumble. You should be bringing this person in, not pushing them out. You should be paying more attention to that. And then he says, but do not despise, so that's B, despising little ones. Do not despise the little ones, one of these little ones. So that sounds crazy. Like, what do you mean? Like, we're not hating them? Well, if you're pushing them out of the circle, if you're not considering them of worth, then yes, you are hating them because you are wishing the worst upon them. And he's still talking about little ones, but that is a metaphor. So he's not talking about children specifically. He's talking about the people that we push out of our circles or out of the kingdom of God, and we cause to stumble, perhaps. See the mission of the Son of Man, his purpose in coming. So he says, for I tell you, well, let's see. It's missing. Luke 11:10 or 19:10. For the Son of Man came to seek and save what is lost. So it's not just in 18:10, but it's also in Luke 19:10. It would have been 18:10 and 11. His purpose of coming. Matthew in verse 11, or Luke in 18:10, and I'm getting things mixed up. Luke in 19:10 tells us the Son of Man came to seek and save what is lost. So in other words, the person outside the circle is what the Son of Man is here for. D, he is introducing a parable that will tell us how he feels about those who are lost. That's true. So he's about to tell us a parable, and that's why Luke 19:10 definitely feels like it fits. It introduces that parable well. It transitions from what he's saying about despising little ones into this parable very well. So he's going to tell us how he feels about those that are lost. Number 3, how does Jesus address this issue in 12 and 13, 18, 12, and 13? So now this parable addresses this issue. He asks them, what do you think? So he's not telling them what is true. He's asking them to consider a similar situation and how they would feel. So he says, what do you think? B, he gives them example they can understand about how important it would be for you to go find even one sheep if they wandered off, even if you had 99 more that didn't wander off. So he's saying, what do you think? If you had 100 sheep and one wandered off, wouldn't you go find that one, even if it meant leaving the 99? This is a familiar parable to us. C, he notes that it would be so important that you would leave the others to find it. Wouldn't the fact that sheep was out there lost and not safe mean enough to you that you would leave the 99 that are safe to go find the one? D says he talks about how much you would rejoice at having found it and be happier. This is a human nature comment than those who had wandered off. So it's crazy, right? That saved is saved. But if something is presumed saved, then it's still being saved tomorrow is, if I have $100 and it's in my wallet and it's always in my wallet, I'm happy, but it was there yesterday. It's going to be there tomorrow. Maybe it's not. But it's still there today. So I don't celebrate. But if I lose $1 and then I find $1, I'm like, man, and, all of a sudden, for some reason, I'm more happy about something that was lost and is found than something that was never lost. And that's something about our nature. And maybe it is the image of God in us. I don't know. But psychologists study this concept. Isn't it crazy that we are more happy about something that we lose and then find again than something that was never lost? And so he's using that to say, isn't that how you feel? Now think about how I feel in the same situation. So number 4 says, does this mean the 99 are not important? A, yeah, he says he would just leave them alone, all by themselves. That's obviously not supposed to be the answer. I think sometimes people use this as an excuse to neglect the ones that are saved, and that's not a good idea or application. But I think the point is, B, no, they are safe and have not wandered off. They are together, and you would leave them in a much safer situation than this one was in. So in other words, maybe you leave them with somebody, an under shepherd. Maybe you leave them in a fenced-in area where they're a little more safe. Maybe there's just strength in numbers and they're okay because they're not out there all alone. But the situation you don't know, the picture that we have on flannel graph is Jesus reaching down into the crevice, because this one wasn't just lost, it had got itself in a bind. And these guys are not in a bind. They're in good situation. They're not going to die where they're at. And so the point of this is, it's not about the 99 not being important. It's about that they are safe, and the one is not safe. The one is wandering out there in a place where he could get himself into trouble. C, no, they are just as important. In fact, he would do the same for each one of them if he needed to. In other words, if tomorrow one of those 99 ones wanders off, he's going to go look for them the same way that he looked for this one. So they are just as important in that he would go out there if they had wandered off and were unsafe in the same way. But they're not unsafe, and that's the point. So he's trying to make a point, that everyone's important. Everyone is important. But the ones that haven't wandered off, the ones that are safe, the ones that are still together, a part of the kingdom, a part of the community, are not the ones who need to be. And so when we think about the circle of the conversation that he's having with his disciples, who are trying to decide which one of them is most important, see, he's saying it's not. So what's important is the one that's outside. And it's not that you guys aren't important. It's just that if you were outside, I'd go find you too. But if you're worried about who inside is important, then you're ignoring the one outside. So he's still talking about the same thing. Number 5, how does Jesus end the parable according to 18:14? A, in the same way. So in other words, he's asked them to consider. He says, what do you think? And then once they determine what they would do, how they would respond, what they think, then he says, in the same way. So the way you feel, that's the way the Father feels. So right now, you're behaving like a child, but not in the right way. You're behaving in a childish way because you want to see who is most important. But I'm telling you, instead, you should be considering who's outside the circle, because that's what the Father considers. That's what the Father cares about. The Father doesn't care about which one of you inside the circle is most important. That's childish. That's the way childish people consider. But he says, but instead, you should be considering who's out. That's what the Father cares about. And that's what the Son of Man came for. Your Father in heaven does not will that any of these little ones should perish. Again, with the little ones. He doesn't want any of them to perish. That's what he cares about. That's what the Son of Man came for. That's what you should be caring about instead of who's most important. Number 6, who is this parable addressed to? A, I think he's trying to tell lost people how important we or they are. I mean, we can get that out of this, but that's not who he's talking to. He's not talking to lost people. He's talking to the disciples. He's talking to the church and correcting them for how they're thinking, because they're not thinking like the Father thinks. B, this is addressed to the 99. This is addressed to the 99 that are frustrated that the shepherd went and left them alone. This is addressed to the 99 who are too busy trying to decide which one of them is most important that they didn't even notice the one wander off. This is addressed to the church. C, he is literally still talking to the people who are trying to decide who is most important in the kingdom. He has already told us that he cares more about somebody who is like a child and nobody else places importance on him or her. And then he told us that we should be really careful if we are somebody that causes them to stumble or perhaps wander away. Now he's telling us how he feels about them if they have wandered away, and how we should feel also. How could we not? How could we not feel that way? Well, we wouldn't feel that way if we were selfish, which is not Christ-like, which means we haven't been learning to be a disciple of Jesus. We haven't been learning from Jesus. Instead, we're still operating in the flesh, in selfishness. So this is for his disciples. This is for the church, who still today justifies our childish actions instead of being childlike. This is for the church today that still worries about who's the best pastor and who's the holiest person in the church and who's got the most sort of clout, who gets elected to the board, whatever, who represents us at district assembly, instead of caring for the lost person that isn't even here. That's who this was written for. It's written to us. And if that's not us, it's still a temptation for us. So it's still written to us. So yeah, we're still talking about that, and we're not done talking about that, honestly. So let's consider ourselves and how we are doing with this, with Jesus' teachings.